They showed up at my door asking for money again. After giving away the business, lying to the public, and trashing my name online, but one final act of betrayal sealed their fate forever. My dad once told me my job was filthy, cut me out of the family business, and erased me from their legacy. Then he showed up at my door, begging for $120,000 to save that same company. For my younger brother, the one they chose instead of me. I'm Henry. I run a pet care chain in Manhattan. Nothing flashy, but it's mine. Built it from the ground up. 7 stores, a strong team, and a sunny little office where I work late with a coffee in hand and a golden retriever curled under my desk. To the outside world, I probably look like I've got it all. But no one sees the fracture behind the storefront. The silence from the people who should have clapped the loudest when I made it. My parents never believed in my work. Not when I told them I wanted to be a vet, not when I won my first scholarship, and definitely not when I built Whisker and Paw. To them, animals didn't matter. And because I chose that life, I lost my place in theirs. I left them for good on Easter Sunday last year. I still remember the morning, gray skies breaking just enough for sunlight to filter through. I drove out of Manhattan early, watching families head to church, quietly convincing myself it wouldn't be that bad. That maybe, just maybe, we'd all sit together and pretend we were still something close to whole. I arrived early, like I always did. My mom's house buzzed with noise, relatives laughing, glasses clinking, someone yelling about real estate in the dining room. It was more crowded than usual, faces I hadn't seen in years smiling like nothing had changed. I brought her favorite cake from a bakery in Brooklyn, set it down in the kitchen. A small offering for a mother who never asked how I was, but who still loved moose. No one noticed when I sat at the end of the table. I didn't mind. I'd learned over the years how to be present and invisible at the same time. I listened, nodded when expected, and focused on my plate. Then came the announcement. My dad stood, glass in hand, clearing his throat in that familiar booming tone reserved for business meetings and big news. "We've made a decision," he said, voice loud and proud. "Starting today, all family assets, including the company, the shares, the real estate, will be handed over to Mateo." For a second, I thought I misheard him. Then the applause started, clumsy and overly eager. My mother beamed, her voice brimming with pride. "Mateo's been with the company 5 years now. He's ready to take it to the next level." No one looked at me. No one asked, "What about Henry?" I was there, but already erased. Mateo is 2 years younger. We weren't close, but we never fought growing up. Everything had always been split fairly. 2 cakes, 2 bikes, 2 sets of matching school clothes. Punishments were even-handed. There was never favoritism. Or so I thought. That illusion shattered when I was 18. I told my dad I wanted to study veterinary medicine. I'd already been accepted to a school with a partial scholarship. I just needed help covering the rest. He stared at me, arms crossed, like I'd confessed to committing a crime. "I'm not putting a dime into that. You want to throw your life away? Do it on your own." That was the moment I stopped being their son and started being the disappointment. Mateo, meanwhile, stayed on the family track. He joined the business, played the role, and slowly, the spotlight shifted. I still helped when I could. Sent Mother's Day roses. Paid for a new AC when theirs broke. Never kept score. Maybe that's why it stung so bad when the scorecard finally came out, and I wasn't even listed. A year ago, Dad called late at night. The company had lost a major contract. They needed $80,000 to avoid collapse. I hesitated, then wired it the next morning. No contract. No acknowledgement. Just a quiet promise. "When your mother and I are gone, you'll still have a share. This is family business." That was all I got. A sentence. A hope. So when they handed everything to Mateo that day, I didn't stay silent like I usually did. "What about me?" I asked, loud enough to hush a room full of wine and steak and stock market talk. People turned, confused, as if they forgot I existed. Then my mother chimed in, ever so gently. "You already have a house, a car, a good career. Mateo doesn't." I looked her in the eye. "That career? I built it with my own hands. I left at 18. Took no money from you. I earned a scholarship, worked 2 jobs, skipped meals to save. Meanwhile, you paid for all of Mateo's tuition. And now you give him everything, like I never mattered. I'm your son too." Before she could respond, Mateo smirked. "You shouldn't be competing with me." I snapped. "Shut your mouth. You don't even have the right to speak right now." That's when Dad slammed the table, voice slicing through the tension. Enough, Henry. You didn't follow the path we laid out. If you hadn't chosen those filthy animals, the company would have been yours. I stared at him. Those filthy animals made me the money that saved your company. If you hate my job so much, pay me back. Right now. His face reddened. He stood. I'm not giving you a damn cent. I raised you, fed you, educated you. And now you're out there cleaning up after dogs and cats like some street sweeper. You're an embarrassment. That was it. I stood, calm and clear. Then we're done. Don't come looking for me again. As I reached the door, I turned back one last time. Not to beg, just to say the truth. I never asked to be born. So don't throw your sacrifices at me like a receipt. I'm not paying for a life I never ordered. Then I walked out. No apologies. No tears. Just freedom. That night, I sat by my window, steaming coffee in hand, listening to the quiet. I thought about the day I left home at 18 with nothing but a suitcase and a dream of healing animals. No one asked if I was okay back then. No one called to check in. But somehow, I still believed they'd love me if I worked hard enough. I was wrong. 6 months passed in silence. No calls. No holiday cards. No guilt-tripped voicemails from my mother. It was as if they'd quietly erased me, and for once, I didn't feel loss. I felt relief. I woke up when I wanted. Worked deep into the night if I needed to. I sipped coffee in my office under warm lighting, surrounded by shelves of pet supplies and handmade thank you notes from customers. For the first time in my life, I wasn't tethered to someone else's definition of worth. But peace has a way of ending the moment you start trusting it. It was a Saturday morning. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. Dad flashed across the screen. My first instinct was to hit decline, but something, curiosity, maybe, made me answer. His voice was flat and abrupt, stripped of pretense. Henry, the company's in serious trouble. No hello. No apology. No acknowledgement of the 6 months we hadn't spoken. I didn't respond. I just waited. It's Mateo, he continued. He signed the wrong supplier contract. There's a breach clause. Damages could reach $120,000, possibly more. We need help. For the family. For the Walker name. I stared at the counter, steam rising off my mug. 80 grand was more than enough the last time, I said. If you want my help, start by paying that back. Silence. I could feel his frustration press against the phone like static. And if the only thing you're trying to save is the family name, I added, let me remind you, that name never saved me. I hung up before he could say anything else. I expected that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The very next morning, just past 7 a.m., my doorbell rang. Not once. Not twice. A series of sharp, insistent chimes. The kind that said, we're not leaving until you open up. I opened the door. There they stood, my parents and Mateo, on my doorstep like they belonged there. As if they hadn't disowned me. As if they hadn't humiliated me in front of 20 relatives and handed over everything I ever hoped to inherit. I didn't let them in. I didn't even step aside. I stood squarely in the doorway, blocking the entrance like it was mine to guard, because it was. If you're here for $120,000, I said calmly, turn around. You're wasting your time. They didn't move. Instead, my mother's expression shifted. Her lips tightened. Her eyes were pink at the edges, but it wasn't grief or guilt. It was strain, stress, fear of loss. Henry, she said softly, you have an entire chain of pet care stores. That money, it's not that much to you. I didn't answer. She stepped forward slightly, voice cracking. If you don't help us, the company could collapse. Everything your father built, gone. Mateo finally spoke, quieter than I'd ever heard him. Henry, please, just this once. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking. I didn't interrupt. I let them speak. I let every word bounce off me like raindrops on sealed glass. Then I said the only thing I could. Leave, or I'll call the police. My father's jaw clenched. His fists curled slightly at his sides. My mother opened her mouth to respond, but I raised my hand to stop her. I want nothing to do with any of you, I said. You made your choices, your silence, your favoritism, your public betrayal. You stood by while I was erased. Now you can live with it. I looked at Mateo. And if the company collapses, that's not a tragedy. It's justice. I'm not responsible for saving anyone anymore. Then I shut the door. I returned to my kitchen, picked up my now cold coffee, and sat down. But as I lifted the mug to my lips, A sudden question froze me mid-sip. How did they know I had 7 stores? I never told them. I never mentioned it at dinners or in group chats. I'd been deliberate, careful, years of downplaying my success because I knew what admiration turned into in our family. They didn't follow my LinkedIn. They weren't on Instagram. I hadn't even updated my old Facebook in years. Then I realized, YouTube. My pet care videos. I still posted educational clips, gentle, heartfelt videos for animal lovers. It was the only public space I hadn't locked down. Someone must have found them. Or someone sent them a link. Maybe they'd been watching quietly all along. And that's when the fear kicked in, not for myself, but for my business. I knew how they operated. When they saw something successful, they didn't celebrate it. They found a way to exploit it. I grabbed my phone, opened my messages, and typed, "If you, Mom, or Mateo take any action that damages my business or reputation, I will sue. I'm serious. Do not test me." Then I hit send. I hoped that would be the end. But the next morning, Mateo posted. He didn't name me directly, but everyone knew. It was the kind of story that spreads fast. The cold, wealthy brother who turned his back on his suffering family. The selfish son who let his own parents fall apart. The traitor who closed the door on his brother's cries for help. His post went viral. I got dozens of messages in hours. Clients canceled grooming appointments. Store reviews were bombed. People boycotted my brand. My staff asked questions I didn't have answers for. My email inbox became a dumping ground for hate. I didn't even need to read the post to understand the damage. I knew Mateo's voice. Knew how he twisted the truth just enough to make himself look like a victim. By that afternoon, I was in Brian's office, my lawyer and old friend. The one who helped me lease my first storefront. I texted him one sentence that morning. "I need to see you. Urgently." His office was bright and quiet, sunlight pooling over a glass table. I laid out the printed screenshots. Canceled appointment logs. DMs from enraged strangers. A copy of Mateo's post. The evidence was overwhelming. When I finished explaining, Brian leaned back in his chair, hands clasped, and smiled slightly. "You just hit the jackpot," he said. I blinked. "What?" He grinned. "You've got everything we need. Public defamation. Documented business losses. Intentional damage to your reputation. Mateo handed us a textbook civil case. I can already tell you, we'll win. And the payout could exceed everything you've lost." I stared at the table, stunned. "Yes," I said slowly. "Draft the case. I'm done being their safety net." I slid over the prepared paperwork I'd brought. Gave him power of attorney. This time, I wasn't asking for closure. I wasn't waiting for them to come around. I was going to sue. Not out of vengeance, but because they thought I'd never fight back. 3 weeks after giving Brian power of attorney, I stopped checking my inbox. The media had picked up the story, Mateo's version, of course. The one where I was a cold-hearted millionaire who abandoned his family when they needed him most. Local blogs and even a few talk shows ran with it. Not a single one had ever celebrated my business. But suddenly, they cared deeply about my supposed moral failings. I stayed quiet. Let Brian handle the press, the trolls, the online petitions calling for boycotts. I focused on work. I walked my dogs, made my videos, showed up for my team. But every night, after the world went quiet, I found myself looking through old photos, pictures from the early whisker and paw days. Me in a mismatched shirt, cutting the ribbon on our first store. A shelf of dog shampoo bottles, crooked and dusty. My first handwritten thank you from a customer. One photo stopped me. It was me, blurry and sunburned, sitting on a folding chair in front of my first store. My eyes were closed, arms crossed, mouth half open from mid-laugh. I remembered that day so clearly, because it was the first time I realized I could do it alone. And just like that, a memory surfaced that I hadn't thought about in years. I was 19, alone at a bus terminal in Albany. My suitcase sat beside me, half broken, zipper stuck. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. My phone was dead. I had $28 left. And I'd just missed my transfer after a snowstorm delayed everything. I remember shivering in that plastic seat, staring at my reflection in the vending machine. I didn't look brave. I looked like a kid who didn't know what he was doing. Because I didn't. But I also remember the woman who sat next to me. Red coat, worn boots. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me a thermos of hot tea and a ham sandwich. "You look like someone doing the right thing," she said, "but haven't realized it yet." That was the night I stopped waiting for anyone to catch me when I fell. And yet, years later, here I was again, looking over my shoulder, letting old wounds fester because I'd never really cleaned them out. That bus terminal memory reminded me why I had to follow through. 3 months after Mateo's post, we got our court date. The Manhattan District Courthouse wasn't far. I left early that morning, sat in my car for a while before walking in. I needed a moment. Not to rehearse anything, just to breathe. Mateo was already seated when I entered. He sat next to his lawyer, his usual arrogance now a twitchy kind of quiet. He didn't look at me. I didn't look at him. Brian was calm, precise. He presented every exhibit like a surgeon wielding a scalpel: contracts, appointment cancellations, social media analytics, screenshots, revenue charts. Every word Mateo had typed in that post was now evidence of calculated malice. His lawyer tried to frame the post as a personal expression. An emotional release, he said. He never expected this level of attention. But the damage was measurable and devastating. 30,000 followers lost across platforms. Dozens of grooming clients canceled. Sponsorships pulled. Partnerships dissolved. The judge listened silently, flipping through documents with a measured pace. Then came the ruling. The defendant, Mateo Walker, is found liable for commercial defamation and damages. He is ordered to compensate the plaintiff, Henry Walker, in the amount of $248,000. Silence. I didn't look back. Didn't search for emotion on my brother's face. I simply stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked out. Not triumphant. Just done. Later I learned Mateo sold the family business to pay the judgment. He also sold the house Dad once claimed would be the pride of the next generation. I didn't investigate the details. I didn't ask where he moved, what job he found. I wasn't curious. They made their choices. They paid the price. The next 6 months were a restoration, of reputation, yes, but more than that, of peace. We opened a new branch in Queens. Revenue rebounded. My inbox no longer scared me. And then, just 3 days ago, it happened again. A knock. Soft. Just past 7 a.m. I opened the door, expecting maybe a package or a neighbor. It was my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not shorter, just diminished. Her hands clutched her bag like it was the only thing anchoring her to the ground. Her face, crimson eyes, lips trembling, told me everything before she even spoke. "Your father, he's in the hospital," she said quietly. "It's serious. The treatment could cost close to $20,000. I didn't react. Not with anger. Not with pity. Just silence. She looked at me, eyes searching. "I know I was wrong," she whispered. "But please, just this once, help me." I stood there for a long time. Then I said, more like an exhale than a sentence, "To me, my parents died the day you let Mateo dismantle everything I built and did nothing." Her mouth opened, then closed, like she wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I stepped back. "Ask your heir." Then I shut the door. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. I didn't cry after closing the door on my mother. She stood there for a moment, still gripping her purse strap like it was keeping her from falling apart. Her mouth opened, but no words came. I watched her through the peephole as she turned slowly and walked away. There was no satisfaction, no rage, just silence, and then something even colder. Doubt. Was she telling the truth? It wasn't that I thought her incapable of compassion. It was that, after everything, I didn't know who she was anymore. When trust breaks that completely, it doesn't heal, it calcifies. And mine had turned to stone long ago. But still, I needed to know. So I didn't go to the hospital that day. No dramatic bedside vigil. No quiet, hand-clasped forgiveness moment. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the information desk. "Charles Walker," I said. "I'm his son. I need a status update." The voice on the other end was calm. Routine. Yes, he was admitted. Yes, the condition was serious. Yes, treatment was underway. And yes, the total cost was just under $20,000. She hadn't lied. For a moment, I felt something flicker. Not pity. Something older. That dangerous, reflexive urge to fix what's broken. To save everyone. Even the ones who never saved me. I almost pulled out my card. But then I looked at the folders sitting on the far end of my desk. The ones filled with court documents. Evidence of Mateo's defamation. Of the lost clients. The hate mail. The business losses. I remembered Easter. The wine toast. The applause. The silence when I asked, "What about me?" My father's voice calling my work filthy. The laughter in Mateo's eyes when he smugly declared I had no right to complain. And then I remembered something else, something I couldn't ignore. The house. They owned it outright. No mortgage. No debt. At least, they did the last time I checked. It was one of the few assets my father had always bragged about. Paid it off in 16 years. That's how real men provide. So why hadn't they mentioned it? Why hadn't they sold the house instead of knocking on my door? The next morning, I called a real estate contact I trusted. I gave the address, explained what I needed. The answer came by noon. Still in their names. No liens. No sales. No changes. Market value. Over $400,000. They had the means to cover Dad's treatment 5 times over. But they chose to come to me instead. That was the moment I knew. This was never about desperation. It was about expectation. They expected I would step in. Again, as I always had. They still saw me not as a son, but as a resource. A safety net. The fallback plan for when their golden boy failed. That afternoon, I sent a message to my mother. Just one line. You still have the house. Sell it to pay for Dad's treatment. She didn't reply. Maybe she was stunned. Maybe she thought I'd break. Maybe she believed that house was always meant for Mateo and couldn't imagine losing it. I didn't care anymore. Because in that moment, I finally understood something I'd spent decades resisting. Some people don't want help. They want control. And the only way to stop the cycle is to cut the cord completely. That night, I brewed a cup of coffee and sat in the quiet. No messages. No noise. Just me and the echo of every time I'd bent over backward to prove my love, only to be treated like an outsider. My phone buzzed once. A text from an unknown number. You really won't help your father? After everything? I didn't respond. I blocked the number. No anger. Just clarity. Because I'd finally stopped trying to be the good son to people who only loved me when I was useful. The next morning, I signed the lease on our 8th Whisker and Paw location. My manager hugged me, unprompted. That afternoon, we finalized a donation to a local animal shelter. We were sponsoring care for 20 rescue pets. And that evening, I stood in our Harlem store, watching my team clean up. Some had been with me since the beginning. Others were new. But they all had something in common. They chose to be here. And I chose them. Not out of blood. Out of love. For 3 mornings straight, the silence was louder than ever. No texts. No emails. No angry doorbells. Just the low hum of life returning to normal. I assumed the message had finally landed. But then came the 4th morning. It was a short email from a local estate firm. Nothing flashy, no subject line screaming for attention. Just one that read, Notice of Property Transfer, Walker Residence. I opened it on instinct, expecting some administrative mix-up. But there it was. In plain legalese. The family home, my parents' fully paid-off house, was in the process of being transferred. Not sold. Not mortgaged to pay hospital bills. Given. To Mateo. I reread the words, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the meaning was clear. They weren't broke. They weren't out of options. They had an asset that could have paid for my father's hospital stay 5 times over. And instead of using it, they handed it to the very son who'd run the company into the ground and nearly bankrupted the family. All while standing on my doorstep asking for help. I almost laughed. Not from humor, just the sheer absurdity. The full clarity. They never wanted my support. They just wanted my money. Even now, with Dad's life on the line, they would rather preserve Mateo's future than acknowledge I was the one who could have saved them. Because to let me help would have meant admitting they'd been wrong. That I'd been right. And that kind of pride, I've learned, is harder to break than any bone. And strangely, in that moment, I felt no rage. Just relief. There was nothing left to guess. The mask was off. That evening, I took a slow walk through Harlem to our newest Whisker and Paw store. It was nearly closing time. One of our part-timers was brushing a nervous pit bull near the back. A young couple stood at the counter asking about diet supplements for their rescue cat. I watched for a while without saying anything. This was what I'd built. With nothing but an old phone, secondhand shelves, and a voice I once doubted would matter to anyone. No inheritance. No shortcuts. No family name to lean on. Just me. And as I stood there, a notification buzzed on my phone. Another news article about nepotism in small family firms. I skimmed the headline and smiled. They still didn't get it. The next few weeks passed quietly. No follow-up calls. No apologies. My father didn't die. In fact, I heard, through one of my old high school classmates who still lives near my parents, that he recovered well enough to return home. No one told me directly, and I didn't ask, but the silence itself spoke volumes. They hadn't called because they didn't want to say thank you, because they knew I hadn't paid. And more importantly, they knew I never would again. Weeks later, I was tidying my office when I found my old college journal buried under a drawer divider. I flipped through it. Most of the pages were angry rants or half-baked budget plans. But one entry stopped me. I had written it after my first New York winter, during a brutal stretch when my heat kept failing and I'd nearly missed a loan payment. I hope one day I don't feel like a mistake in someone else's story. I put the journal down and looked around. There were photos of our grand opening, handwritten thank you notes from clients, employee anniversary cards, a plaque from a shelter recognizing our donations. I wasn't a mistake. I was the proof that walking away doesn't always mean giving up. Sometimes, it's the first step to building something better. Epilogue. I haven't seen my father since that night on Easter. Mateo, from what I've heard, couldn't sustain the company after the lawsuit. He sold what was left of it and moved out of state. The house, yes, the one I told them to sell to pay medical bills, was eventually put on the market anyway. Funny how that works. But I didn't reach out, didn't investigate, didn't need to, because I've finally learned what real family looks like. It's the team member who stays after hours to comfort a frightened dog. The customer who shares a video we posted and says it helped them feel less alone. The kid who writes to say he wants to be a vet because of something I said in a video 4 years ago. Those people? They chose me, and I chose them back. So if you're reading this, and you've ever been made to feel like the black sheep because you dared to live differently, know this. You don't owe loyalty to people who only remember your name when they need something. You're allowed to close the door without guilt. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is never open it again.